Mega Man 1 wound up being pretty successful. So of course, Capcom went on to make a sequel. Little did they know, Mega Man 2 would go on to become the singular most popular Mega Man game to ever release. For many fans, this was their entry into the series. This was the first game they ever played. So why exactly was Mega Man 2 so popular? And more importantly, is it really that good of a game? I think the most important thing to consider here is how Mega Man 2 plays differently from Mega Man 1. In terms of controls, the game is more or less the same, with basic shooting and platforming, but this time around, the main gimmick of Mega Man is expanded upon, that being the weapon system. In the last game, most of the 6 weapons were very simplistic and useless outside of boss fights. Mega Man 2, however, ups the number of Robot Masters to 8, so you now have more weapons to play around with, and what you can actually do with these weapons vastly changes the way the game plays. Because of that, I would like to talk about each of these weapons individually. First and foremost, we have the Metal Blade. This is the best weapon in the game, by far. It grants the ability for Mega Man to shoot in any direction, including diagonally. The projectile itself is wider than a power pellet and does more damage. It also uses less than a single tick of weapon energy, so what this really means is you can replace your Mega Buster entirely with a Metal Blade, because on top of being superior in every single aspect, it replenishes weapon energy faster than it depletes it. And having a standard weapon like this has a few interesting consequences on the game. For one, there are enemies that drop minions from the sky, but with the Metal Blade, you can now snipe these enemies before they become a problem. Secondly, you can now safely eliminate enemies standing on higher or lower platforms than you without having to get dangerously close. But perhaps you're in a situation where enemies are surrounding you, and you don't really have time to snipe them all. Well, in this game, you have access to a weapon called the Leaf Shield. The Leaf Shield puts up a barrier around you that kills all small enemies when they touch it. You can also shoot the Leaf Shield out as a projectile. The only downside to this weapon is so many enemies are immune to it. And you can also stop time. When you equip the world, Mega Man can freeze all enemies on screen and run right by them. He can even freeze stage hazards like instant death lasers and platforms to make parkour easier. Sadly, the world is kind of bad in this game because you can't cancel it when it starts, so you only get one shot, and then you have to wait it out to even attack. If it could be cancelled, this weapon would have been so much better. But if you just want to do a lot of damage, you have access to the Atomic Fire. At a glance, it looks like a normal projectile, but actually, if you hold down the shoot button, you can fire a powerful charge shot. Sadly, this weapon burns its own weapon energy faster than it burns enemies, so I personally don't use it. The Quick Boomerang is good for chipping away enemy HP fast, and it barely consumes energy like the Metal Blade, so it's another alternative to the Mega Buster. The Bubble Lead races across the ground, and the Air Shooter targets aerial enemies, but these two weapons are made mostly irrelevant by the Metal Blade, so except for a few instances, they are pretty useless additions. The Crash Bomber shoots a sticky bomb that detonates after a few seconds, dealing a ton of damage. It can also destroy certain walls, allowing you to take hidden routes. Lastly, remember the temporary platform you can spawn in Mega Man 1? Well, this time around, you have access to 3 platform skills, one of which floats upwards, the second horizontally, allowing you to skip parts of a stage, and the third crawls up walls. Unlike the first game, you can unlock these from clearing levels, so backtracking is not required. All around, a very solid lineup of weapons, but because there are so many, you now have to scroll through 2 pages of weapons. And since you flip between them somewhat frequently, this can get a little bit annoying. Still, I would consider these a huge improvement over Mega Man 1, because now you have actual variety on how you take on levels. And when you think about it, that was the original intention of having a weapon switching system in the first place. Not to mention the extra layer of strategizing that this system adds. And on the topic of strategizing, Mega Man 2 actually has a brand new type of item known as an E-Tank. E-Tanks are like potions. You can use them from your inventory to heal up. Since they go away when you game over, you are incentivized to use them instead of hoarding them for the final battle. E-Tanks are often put behind areas that ask you to make a calculated decision. Do I want to waste my weapon energy here to get this E-Tank? Do I want to face a stronger enemy and risk death to get this E-Tank? Decisions. It just gives you something else to think about as you take on levels, and I personally love the way it's implemented. Another thing to talk about is the game's enemies, and once again we see a huge improvement. One of my biggest complaints with the first game was that enemies popped out of literally nowhere. Mega Man 2 addresses this problem in several ways. Standard enemies now broadcast their attacks. For instance, check out how this enemy in the factory level gives a nice tell before it drops from the sky. Enemies no longer pop out of unpredictable locations to get a cheap shot on you. And enemies with inconsistent behavior, such as the large jumping robot, have been replaced with ones that behave consistently. And as a result, dealing with them is now much more fair. Not to mention, a lot of the new enemies have really cool designs and are fun to fight. I mentioned in my last video that Mega Man 1 was incredibly hard. Mega Man 2 actually adds something to smooth out gameplay. That something being actual difficulty settings. There is a normal mode and a hard mode. Hard mode is scaled very similarly to Mega Man 1, and is the only difficulty in the Japanese version, but normal mode is in my opinion a better experience because it changes the pace of the game. You still can do the same amount of planning and mental mapping when you enter a room that I praised 1 for, but in 2 you also get to run ahead and enjoy the level more. Definitely a welcome inclusion. And while we're talking about improvements, there are some subtle tweaks to boss mechanics. Boss rooms for the Robot Masters no longer have a challenge leading up to them that you have to redo in between every attempt, and the Robot Masters themselves can't kill you after you kill them, which was an actual oversight in the original game. Another great thing about Mega Man 2 is its presentation. The sprite work is beautiful and the soundtrack is full of bangers. I mean, just listen to this music. I would argue the art and music alike are better than the first game, which is a massive flex considering Mega Man 1 was praised for those elements. But now it's about time we talk about the levels. How are the levels in this game? Are they better than Mega Man 1, or are they worse? Well, the answer is the levels in Mega Man 2 are kind of a mixed bag. Most of the Robot Master levels are far better than 1's. The enemies are placed more intelligently, and there are no blind falls into spikes. Although in Bubble Man's level there is a blind fall into a crab enemy, but that's the only instance in this game where that happens. As for Bubble Man's stage itself, I think that it's actually an awesome level with some really cool layouts of enemies, and it is one of the few good water levels in video games. Metal Man's stage is a really cool factory with conveyor belts and spiked crushers to dodge. Crash Man's stage involved climbing a large tower and sniping enemies in the air with the metal blade. Flashman's stage involved descending a crystal dungeon while taking one of many alternating paths and dealing with some of the coolest layouts of enemies. As in the first game, you can technically get hit in midair and one-shot, so you would think that this would be a big problem in Airman's stage. But actually, I found that the game gave me the tools to deal with these enemies, so it never became a problem in the first place. Airman himself was not very fair though, given he has attacks that are notoriously undodgeable, but I did like the level itself. The boss fights against the Robot Masters in general are pretty fair though, as they broadcast their moves, and dodging them is reasonably difficult. Woodman's level was a highlight for me. I think that the jungle was awesome. So this game has some really high highs, but then we get to the bad stuff, and good heavens, some of these levels are really terrible. Heatman's level, for instance, takes the god-awful parkour from Iceman's level in Mega Man 1 and somehow makes it even worse. You have to learn where these disappearing blocks appear, and the only way to do that is by dying to them. But if you die, you have to restart the entire room. Even before you reach the lava pit, the penalty for falling is spending half a minute walking back to the start. As I said in the first video, I don't have problems with hard games, but this challenge is not bad because it's hard. This game's idea of a challenge is wasting your time. So your options are A, spend half an hour on this terrible puzzle, or B, defeat Airman so you can cheat the puzzle with a well-placed moving platform. Then we have another terrible level, Quickman's level. You have to dodge a bunch of lasers when you fall, which is a really cool concept, but sadly, the way it's executed is really horrible, because some of these lasers require you to race to the end at a nearly frame-perfect pace. So if you lose even a millisecond, the lasers will instantly kill you. You will die a lot here, and each death means you have to waste time replaying some of the level. But Hydra, you can just stop time! Yes, you can use the world here, but the world doesn't have nearly enough weapon energy for you to cross the entire puzzle. Unless you're playing the phone port, which cancels it upon screen transitioning, you're going to run out of the world. And if you die after this, you are out of weapon energy, so you have to force a game over just for another chance at using the world. I think about now is the time I bring up the biggest problem with this game, and that would be weapon energy. It takes a really long time to farm in most cases, and the game constantly asks you to have full weapon energy just to clear puzzles and boss fights, especially during the Wily levels. For some stupid reason, energy carries over between levels, so the only way to reset it is to trigger a game over. And to do that, you literally have to throw yourself at enemies until your health reaches 0 for however many lives you have left. It blows my mind how hard it is to reset. So with all of this in mind, I think it's appropriate we talk about the Wily levels. You cannot brush these aside in a conversation about Mega Man 2 because, like it or not, they make up the larger half of the game's runtime, and to be frank, all of them suck. They are some of the worst levels in any Mega Man game. You start off infiltrating Wily's castle as some awesome music plays and you feel like a total badass, but then, once you reach this room, a realization is about to set in that you are in for a bad time. After you try out all of your options to get to the ladder, you may eventually notice weapon 1 is the only way to go, but it can't quite reach, so you actually need to jump out of the way and make some really precise timing in your spawns. It is very likely that this puzzle will drain your weapon energy entirely, and you will have to do crazy things to get it back, but eventually you will succeed, and you won the level. Just kidding, screw you, here's a dragon. Assuming you reacted to this surprise and didn't die from the chase, this dragon boss will undoubtedly cause a number of deaths through the terrible hit stun death fall mechanic. To kill it on time, you need to throw every weapon at it while your HP is declining and pray you land on its weakness, so your ability to kill this dragon is based on lucky guessing. Not to mention every time you die you need to redo the parkour, but you won't have the weapon energy to redo the parkour, so you actually are going to have to force deaths until you trigger a game over. So once you finally realize that the knights of the days of old slayed dragons with boomerangs, you cleared the first Wily level, so the bad stuff is over, right? No, we're just getting started. Wily level 2 is more of the same. Pray you have weapon energy to get to the boss room, only this boss is easily defeated by the metal blade. But this boss also has a dirty trick. It will come out of blocks in an unpredictable pattern, causing damage that you really cannot avoid. So once again, your victory is determined by lucky guessing rather than skill. So this is yet another bad boss fight. Wily level 3 is pretty easy, but the boss is yet again kind of unfair, and fighting it will deplete your weapon energy, so if you lose, you have to force another game over. And then we get to the single worst level in the entire game, Wily level 4. It starts off with an invisible pit trap gimmick, no harm no foul, but then after spending a while clearing that, you reach these rotating platforms, and these platforms are a fun challenge to cross. The first time, they just take a while. Something stupid this game does is when you switch weapons on a ladder, you unexpectedly are ejected from the ladder, and if you don't know you have to react to this the moment you switch weapons, you will die. But anyways, once you reach the end, you enter a boss room. But something is really wrong here. This is no boss, just some walls to break with Crashman's power and some orbs stuck to the wall. Every few seconds the room hits you with an undodgeable attack, applying pressure on you to do something, and to do it fast. But what are you supposed to do? Well, it turns out this boss baits you into breaking blocks you're not supposed to break, and then kills you as you have no way to fight it anymore because you're out of weapon energy. You have to just sit there and die, but when you respawn, you lack the weapon energy to attempt it again. So you have to burn through however many lives you have left to force a game over, go through the entire long stage with the rotating platforms, and show up here again. Only now, the game expects you to learn that you have to break as few blocks as possible, miss 0 shots from Crashman's weapon, and walk in with full health. You also have to clear this as fast as possible, and if you do any of these things wrong, you have to force another game over and clear this level again, complete with that really long rotating platform section. This is a really terribly executed concept and a great example of how to not make a boss fight in a video game. If you wanted to make a boss like this so badly, why not make it its own level? Why do we have to replay the entirety of the parkour challenge leading up to it every time we fail? It makes no sense. And what do you get for beating this level? A boss rush. This boss rush in itself is not hard. What's hard here is the surprise at the end. Not only do you have to have mastered the fights against the robot masters, you have to be able to learn the patterns of a 2-phased boss fight against Wily that immediately follows, and find the weapon weakness it has. If you screw this up, you will have to fight every single robot master in the game all over again, and this will likely happen a number of times. You can also run out of weapon energy for Wily's boss phases fairly easily, so you'll have to force a game over and fight the robots again for that reason alone too. Another reason I hate this level is Wily's second phase has disjointed hitboxes on his projectiles. You can't run under them in spite of how high they bounce. Oh geez, if only I had another movement option here, like maybe a slide or something? That would fix all my problems. So you beat all the levels and the game is over, right? No, just kidding. There's one more boss fight. And actually, I like this fight. It's against a fake alien and it's really hard, but hard in a good way. It makes you time your jumps just right so you have to dodge most of its attacks. And to me it feels like a well-scaled final boss. If only more boss fights were like this. After completing this game, I came to a realization. Why is there weapon energy in the first place? None of the Wily levels would be too awful if there was no weapon energy. Furthermore, most of the weapons have considerable cooldowns between shots that balance them out. Apart from the world, I can't think of a single weapon that benefits from its existence. If you ask me, it would be better if these weapons could all be used casually. If the best weapon in the game, the metal blade, already can be used casually, then there's no reason to hold the other weapons back. So what's my final verdict? Believe it or not, I still like Megaman 2, and I think it's a pretty decent game. In spite of the frustrating second half, the early levels were enjoyable and well made. Overall, this game is a step in the right direction and made a lot of fantastic improvements upon the original game. If you were to ask me which game is better though, I really couldn't tell you, because they both have a lot of good and a lot of bad. But I want to return to the questions I asked at the beginning of this video, because there are a lot of insights that we can get from them. The first being, why exactly was Mega Man 2 so popular? And the answer to that is, it was popular by design. Capcom made sure to go ham on promoting the game. The reason Metal Man is weak to his own weapon, according to actual interviews, is because they wanted the game to be featured in prominent gaming magazines, which at the time were far more likely to show off games with hidden features. Furthermore, Capcom rushed the game's development so it could be released for the holidays to boost its sales, and thus its popularity. So believe it or not, this game only took 3 months to make, and according to the devs, they didn't have enough time to test things, so they couldn't balance weapons or boss fights. And that to me begins to explain Wily's castle levels. Which segues quite well into the next question. Is Mega Man 2 really that good of a game? I think the answer is complicated, because at the time of the game's release, it got nearly perfect scores all across the board. You have to understand back then standards for games were very different, and Mega Man had some of the best graphics and music around, so at the time it was easy to perceive Mega Man 2 as a masterpiece, and yet Mega Man 2 is still held as the gold standard for Mega Man games today. Not only is it the only classic game in the West to get a mobile port, but it is also the best-selling Mega Man game when you account for how it carried the first Legacy Collection sales. When people think about Mega Man, this is the game that comes to mind. But in holding Mega Man 2 to such a high regard today, people have created a false narrative that Mega Man 2 is still the best Mega Man game. But to be blunt, later titles in this franchise would expand and improve upon everything this game has to offer. because those are way better games with way more dev time that, in my opinion, deserve far more recognition than this one. And that's all I have to say about Mega Man 2. If you're enjoying my video series, consider subscribing to my channel to support me, because I am trying to reach 1,000 subscribers so this channel can be more than a hobby. Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a wonderful day, take care of yourself, and see you next time when I will be covering Mega Man 3.